Hi, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Leadership Launchpad's Pick a Mix podcast. And we have got a man that you might know, but you might not have seen for a while because he's been off doing other little projects. And that is, again, you may have known him as David Weston. His name now David Monis-Weston. And for lots of us, we know him from the Teacher Development Trust, TDT, of which, and he'll remind me, you were the founder, David?
That's right, yeah.
I mean, that in itself feels a bit bonkers that you were, at the beginning of that, what became such an important and still is an important kind of part of education. So that's where my first connection came with you. And now you've gone off and done other really interesting things that we're all excited to hear about. But tell us a little bit about your role at TDT, and then take us forward in time and then back in time.
Well, thank you very much for inviting me on, Chris. Yes, it's sort of amazing thinking now when I look at Teacher Development Trust doing amazing things in the space of professional development and publishing research, and I'm thinking, oh, that was my baby. So back in 2012, I founded the trust, and it was just me. I'd been teaching 10 years, and I didn't really know much about running charities, and kind of set the organization up and gradually helped it grow and become influential and do some really interesting things and work with some incredible leaders and incredible schools, including yourself. And over that time, develop and deliver more and more professional development, as well as try and influence what government was doing and thinking in that space. So after 11 years of being the CEO, I then appointed one of our directors as my co-CEO, which actually proved to be a fantastic model. I was really enjoying that. And then after 12 years of being at Teacher Development Trust, decided it was probably time to move on. So I then moved on to this new charity, Purposeful Ventures, which actually some people may have heard of more than they realise. It used to be part of the Multi-Academy Trust ARC. ARC had ARC Ventures and did all sorts of things like setting up the charity Frontline, or what became the Institute for Teaching that later on became Ambition Institute. And they set up a really interesting charities. And then a couple of years ago now, they spun that off to become a fully independent charity, Purposeful Ventures, where we work with really interesting and interested philanthropists who want to make a difference in young people's lives. And then we help either create new charities or grow charities or support charities to make a difference in the space. And we then connect these incredible charities and social entrepreneurs together with philanthropists. And it's an absolute joy working here. And I can tell you more about that at some point. But it goes back. I love probably most drawing on my 10 years as a secondary physics and maths teacher. Which was a whole fascinating journey in itself, but something I also loved. But I love now being able to help people working with education to maybe get a bit more of a sense of what it's really like.
Yeah. Oh my goodness! Oh, I've got so many questions already in my head. And I joked about us offline that potentially could derail the whole podcast by just talking about all that exciting stuff. One of the things that's on my mind, I suppose, as you talk about that is, do the entrepreneurs or the philanthropists typically come from education, or are they trying to give back to education?
Oh, it's a real mix. For example, one of the things, one of our portfolios that we have here is children and families, and really looking at families in their earliest times and some of the most vulnerable families. One of the projects that my colleagues over there did recently was work with Save the Children, and some other key donors, and they noted that there were this network around the country, or this group of around the country, of essentially food banks, but for parents with young babies, baby banks, you call them. And they realized that all these people were desperate to do fundraising, but they were often just volunteers and they couldn't really do anything systematic. So created this thing called the Baby Bank Alliance, which essentially connects all of these baby banks together, helps them coordinate, but also help them do really big fundraising, including with people like IKEA, for example.
Wow.
And that was amazing. So actually lots of small social entrepreneurs trying to make change, but actually being able to then connect them together with philanthropists and help them build a structure.
Yeah.
That's an example. But there have certainly been people coming from the education space, trying to make change. And actually, that could be anything from schools or early years or higher education. And a piece of work I know we've done recently is helping young people from more underrepresented backgrounds not only get into university, but do post-degree study, whether master's or doctoral or postdoctorate work, particularly in kind of science, technology, and medicine. So it's fascinating, and I'm learning around so many different areas, even though my areas tend to be more schools focused, that I'm focusing on maths teaching, maths teachers, AI and ed tech, maths curriculum, lots of interesting areas like that.
And again, it just flows to my mind, is the organisation you work for now the organisation you wish you had access to before you set up the TDT?
Yeah, absolutely. I think of all of those times where I was a person with an idea and had an amazing board, but the intensity of support that we now are able to give charities and kind of wrap around them to help those social entrepreneurs be successful and say, look, bring your strengths and we can kind of help fill in the others. I really wish I'd had access to that. And actually, you see brilliant charities in the space who have gone on and do amazing things, who often did have that systematic support, whether it's, I don't know, looking back 25 years ago-ish or so on, to Teach First or Frontline or some of those really big charities now. They often did grab those resources at the time. And, I think TDT showed there are other ways to do that, but it's a really powerful thing. And I think as leaders, to find those networks where we can help fill in some of those areas we're not so strong, and who can perhaps challenge our ways of thinking as well as connect us with people in a systematic way rather than an ad hoc way, is so important.
Yeah. And we briefly chatted before we came on about this idea that you're now mixing much more widely than the education sector, and you're finding it really, really kind of fruitful and kind of galvanizing some of the stuff you're learning from people outside of education. Is that right?
That's right, yes. For me, what's been fascinating is I'm now in an organization that is employs just exceptional people who have run charities or have been really senior in, say, policy or research or in education. And quite a lot of people who've worked in management consultancy. And I'll freely admit that I kind of lent into that, what I now realize is a bit of a tired old trope of, management consultants just come in and make their slides and they don't really know anything. And genuinely, some of the most insightful, challenging conversations I've had are with people who have an incredible toolkit and skill set to analyze problems and structure them and break them down and ask brilliant questions and push through to sort of not get just the first right answer, but the best answer.
Right.
And it has been really professionally challenging and developing to do so.
Wow.
So I apologize to every management consultant. They're actually very talented people, it turns out.
Well, again, and the listeners typically feed back to me that there are key takeaways for them to take after each episode and calls to action and stuff like that. And I guess that's already one then, isn't it? About how widely do they think as leaders in terms of their professional development? Are they looking within education, outside of education? What could we learn from that? Well, let's get back more into sort of your story then. So, for those that are new to the podcast, we have a series of set kind of pieces, I suppose you'd call them, all with the aim of getting kind of behind the leader, to know a bit more about them rather than the stuff we see on the surface. And the first one we're going to talk about is what we call a fast friends question, again aimed at highlighting some vulnerability and maybe some connection that audience members have. And so David's chosen 3 of those that we'll kind of periodically move through. And the first one he chose was, what in your life do you feel most grateful? So tell us about that.
Yes. There's definitely been a few things I'm incredibly grateful for. The one that, without doubt, is the biggest is the fact that in 2009, I had a liver transplant. So I had about 4 or 5 years before, I'd started feeling quite unwell, and it was initially a little bit mysterious, and then later on I had been diagnosed as effectively having a sort of faulty immune system that was attacking my own liver. And I just became so ill, and it drained all of my energy. And the fact that at some point later my life was saved because not only some individual actually had said, I will donate my liver after, when I die, but also that person's family to say, yes, please do carry on and agree to their wishes.
Yeah.
That just extraordinary act of generosity, which was so life-changing for me, and I think we'll come back to that later. I mean, I couldn't be more grateful. I think I can think of no other gift which is as big as to give someone else life, and it saved mine, and it gives you a perspective.
Yeah.
It's not like I think about it every minute of every day,
No.
but there are those moments when you think I'm having a hard day, or I'm feeling unlucky about something, when you just think, actually, no, I'm the luckiest person in the world. It's extraordinary.
And is that a perspective shift, I suppose? You're zooming out of that immediate problem that you're kind of thinking about?
Yeah, absolutely. There is people talk about the practice of gratitude. I've just got this huge anchor in my life to say, well, in decades and centuries gone past, someone like me would never have been alive still. And not only am I grateful for medical technology, but also to this person.
Yeah.
And, there's no doubt that practice of gratitude and what am I grateful for and how lucky I feel is an incredibly important part of being resilient, I think. But to have something to hold on to so tangible is incredible.
And does that help you when I don't know, does it help you with what for lots of us we trivialize lots of our own problems? I don't know what I'm trying to say there, but that idea of, has it helped you not to get stuck in what are seemingly small problems in life?
I think so. I think there are times when you feel stuck where you can say, oh, come on, you can get through this because you got through.
Sure.
Which I think is really interesting, to be able to narrate that in your head and have that voice in your head that says, come on, David, you've got this.
Yeah.
You have survived X, or you successfully got through Y.
Yeah.
Which is an interesting thing, because we kind of need to nurture that voice ourselves. And of course, in the students that we teach, they need that voice to say, each piece of success I've had, the next one I can manage because I have had success before, right?
Yeah.
But certainly for me, it is one of those things I go back to.
Yeah, of course you do. Yeah. How fascinating. Well, I mean, that leads nicely into, I guess, your first ignition point, where your life changed. And I guess you've talked a little bit about the event, so, getting a new liver. I guess it'd be interesting to hear a bit more about how it's now changed you.
Yeah, it's. I definitely see there was sort of a life before and life after.
Okay.
And there were a number of points in my life where, I suppose in my 20s, I had felt slightly stuck, I suppose, partly because I didn't know why, but I was always tired.
Right.
And later on, it became a diagnosed thing. And I was, I remembered myself as a teenager being someone who had a lot of energy, and I could throw myself at problems and I could be successful. And my 20s, I just found it a real struggle. And this coincided with being with some of my teaching career and realizing that I was just finding it really hard. And it is a high energy thing at the best of times.
Yeah.
And to realize that I was constantly not being able to bring my best self. But I was doubting myself, because even though now in hindsight, I can say, oh, you were exhausted the whole time, you were ill, you couldn't concentrate, you had brain fog. But at the time you think, well, there's something wrong with me and I'm not very good at this. And maybe, some of my academic success early in life was luck and I'm actually not that great, and da-da-da. So it was very, very hard. And then I remember I sort of got worse and worse and worse. And eventually I was off work for a few months because I just couldn't work. And then there was eventually, after a couple of false starts, I eventually had the call and went in and had the transplant. And it was many hours operation. And then it began many weeks, months really, of feeling better. But I will never forget waking up in a lot of pain and looking at myself, I think in a mirror, or maybe it was a photo, I guess, I don't know, and suddenly realizing I wasn't yellow colored anymore, and
Right.
suddenly realizing I could think and differently. I felt
No
an energy level I hadn't felt for years. And it was like that was life after. And then actually, even though I was very frustrated with sometimes the slow pace of recovery, my brain was just going at a rate where it was like a joy of like, wow, I don't know, it's like you're riding a bike and you hadn't realized the brakes were stuck for a long time. And then
way. Right,
suddenly they're
right, right.
out. You're like, oh my God, I'm free.
Yeah.
And suddenly I just felt I could throw myself at things, and I could throw myself at my teaching. And funnily enough, at the same time, I discovered what was then the delights of Twitter that has now become the awfulness of X. But and this incredible community of people, and I discovered loads of fascinating research about teaching, and I was applying for jobs in my school, and I was exploring and doing things, and that new lease of energy was just so completely transformational. And the idea that I suddenly had the second chance to go and try things and do things, and it led me to taking some good risky decisions, like deciding to come out at school, and and I chatted to the head teacher and then did assemblies and sort of decided to say, well, look, you've had the second chance at life. I remember watching the film Milk, if anyone has ever seen
Yeah,
it,
no, yeah.
incredible film, in hospital, and I realized, my God, if your second chance was for anything, it's at least this, stand up and be yourself,
Yeah.
things like that. But all sorts of things in my life, I realized I wanted to throw myself at now. And it was genuinely a massive turning point, physically and mentally.
Yeah, that's fascinating. And I'm assuming that the people around you noticed a demonstrable change.
Yeah, yeah, they did. And I think in the first few months, it was sort of calm down, you're still recovering. And I still remember emailing things to my school and going, I've worked on this and I've done that. And they're like, you're still
Yeah.
literally only a few days out of hospital. You're supposed to be recovering. And people were smiling and laughing at me because they were like, I can see how much you desperately want to get back, but just take your time. And I'm not a patient person at the best of times.
Yeah.
Yeah, people saw it. And then, I don't know, sometimes, it can be a bit of a tsunami if I'm like in full ideas
Sure.
mode. And I'm sure not knowing myself as well then as I do now, it probably was overwhelmed people at some times. We're like, let's do all of these things.
Yeah.
But yeah, people noticed. And it was lovely to get that reflected back of like their happiness. They could see me happier. And actually, it was fairly, shortly after that, I'd met someone, and that was really great. And we got married as it happens, which is a whole other story that didn't work out in the long term. But like so many things changed in my life, and it was, it's like a series of dominoes, really.
Yeah. And it's an interesting, I wonder, we draw links to kind of more general leadership in that I was talking to some people recently, another lady who only recently had a dyslexia diagnosis. And she was reflecting on how the diagnosis then made everything make sense. And she felt like for them the shackles were off, and where she'd been kind of, I don't know, performing adequately, she was able to reach a whole nother level of effectiveness. Is that so? I mean, there's some parallels there.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I think it is definitely some parallels. And I think it's been interesting to kind of realize and retell the story, if you like, about how I was before.
Yeah.
So I think that's been very interesting
Yeah.
to realize, and maybe not beat myself up so much and say when I wasn't the teacher I wanted to be, actually, maybe it was kind of okay.
Yeah.
I mean, it wasn't okay. I could have been a better teacher, but I can understand why. And then I could understand how I could then channel my newer found energy into being better.
Yeah.
So yeah,
That is fascinating, and I mean, again, I'm interested in. I'd be interested for leaders to reflect on the people in their teams who they may feel like aren't performing at a 10, let's say, or 10, and encouraging them to explore why that might be, because it may be a medical thing, but it also may be a demotivation. It could be a well-being thing. It could be anything that's not allowing them to perform at their best.
yeah,
And that in itself is fascinating to find out, because you'd unlock, wouldn't you?
Yeah.
unlock something. Um,
Yeah, I agree. I think it's a fascinating thing. I sometimes wonder what, in that period, what school leaders could do
yeah,
differently with me, the ones who'd been my line managers. And it's difficult because they could have asked me wonderful coaching questions and open questions, and I wouldn't have known the answer.
no,
And I wouldn't have known until nearly a decade later, actually, turns out this was the issue.
yeah,
It's a matter of, kindness and telling people you believe what their potential could be, I
yeah,
think. But it will always be difficult, and I think that's okay. I
yeah.
think that's okay. It's one of these are the sort of the struggles that form us as we go through.
Um, and I people ask me, regularly about my role and how lucky I am, and all this sort of thing. How do I get to do what you're doing, and how do I stay so energetic and all that? And I said, well, there's probably an undiagnosed condition going on for me, but hey. But the thing I talk about more about that is that I've had a series of leaders, almost my whole career, who, whether consciously or not, have noticed me approaching a kind of plateau
Hmm.
and just created more opportunities, And I, I don't know whether it was a conscious thing, but I seem to have n- never experienced a prolonged dip in
Hmm.
fee or demotivation, and I worry about people who haven't had that experience and
Hmm.
are demotivated, and also in an environment where they're neither being asked whether they're demotivated or feel safe enough to go and say, I need a new challenge.
Yeah, and look, this whole how do we create the environment in which people can have a vulnerability, but also request the challenge and request the support and get
Mm,
that balance right, and sometimes be given challenge and support they didn't even know they needed,
yeah,
like creating these environments where teachers thrive and so that children succeed. That became my mantra, my fascination when setting up and running Teacher Development Trust. How do we create that for everybody? Because I'd known when I'd had it and when I hadn't had it.
yeah,
And I met hundreds and hundreds of teachers at various stages of either having it or not having it, and seeing the massive difference it makes, and the difference that in turn can make for young people that we work with.
yeah.
So yeah, I mean, it massively resonates with me what you're
Nice.
saying.
Well, let's move on to your first kind of launch pad. And again, for those that are new to the podcast, these launch pads are kind of infographics that I started making to try and understand stuff, and then became a kind of, almost a hobby really, from a creative outlet.
Mm.
And they get into a book. The first one that David's chosen is a really interesting one for me, and it was quite a recent lesson I had to learn. I'll give you a bit of background on it. And so it's called When the Helpfulness Stops, Stop. It was a lazy reference to that in the one in gambling, thing, when the fun stops, stop. Um, and the tagline says, half the battle with communication is being understood, and that starts. Keep going anyway. But effectively, this came about because of a piece of work I was doing in my trust with teaching and learning leads. So there's 35 schools in my trust, and we were working with the teaching and learning leads. And it was all about mental models of teaching and learning. And so effectively, we wanted to pull people together to explore, quite simply, what do we all think about, effective AFL, effective feedback, all based on that kind of Peps McRae work around our mental model drives our behaviour and our behaviour drives our impact. And in a trust where we care about every single kid, we don't want a negative level of variability. And that may come about because people are doing things differently, and if that comes about because we as T&L leads have different mental models, that's maybe something we could approach. And so it basically came about that we sat down for almost 2 days and scribbled on bits of paper and typed them all up and all these things. And my instant reaction and instinct was to then publish those on the website, and we could have a trust-wide way of doing stuff. And I would be hailed as a hero, and everyone would steal it, and people would say, "Oh my God, Chris Baker's mental models." And Eric quite selfishly wanted to show off all the work that we'd done. And in a rare moment of maturity, I was sort of kind of now this idea of kind of if helpfulness is up the left hand side of the graph, and along the right hand side is kind of like progress maybe or development. You get this initial stage of dialogue, which is what I was talking about. Me and the other teaching and learning leads talking about what is effective teaching and learning, which is really helpful. And to then get some sort of alignment was even more helpful. So suddenly we're like, this is great, this is great. And then we get to this idea of creation. So we've created these mental model sheets, which are kind of records of our collective understanding of our teaching and learning. Great. And then that's when the pause came, and I thought, I wonder if that is potentially the sweet spot of helpfulness. The chat's been helpful, the alignment is helpful, documents could be helpful. If we now go to publication, put them on a website or somehow web distributing it, have I tipped over that sweet spot? Because there's the potential with the publication that it might be kind of inferred that that's the way you have to do things. If I was to put it on the trust website, people might then, at a distance, infer that that's the only way that they have to teach that way. So you also, of course, have the opportunity that people then either know about it or don't know about it, engage with it or don't engage with it, understand it or don't understand it, or take it and then make it something different. And so quite quickly, I thought, maybe we don't publish it. Maybe we just put them in a folder where the teaching and learning leads can access them. And there's an agreement that whatever work you're doing in your academy, please reference the collective wisdom. But at no point will anyone see them unless you give them to them. And so it was fascinating. We pulled back from that, and we were never really going to go to prescribing. But I thought to finish off the infographic, the obvious things negatively that come about when you prescribe, certainly teaching and learning, is this sort of reduced levels of engagement, reduced ownership, responsibility, accountability. You certainly reduce the ability for people to contextually align it. And then if people are told exactly what to do, they then don't start taking risks of trying to find new ways to do things to then get a decrease in innovation. So that was kind of what I was thinking when I made it, but why did it resonate with you?
Well, I mean, it's fascinating hearing you reflect on that, and that there is something about the act of co-creation, which is kind of like divergent and then helping people do some thinking. And at the moment it's then, and now just do this. It like this sort of imposed framework thing or a static document, it becomes less helpful.
Yeah.
And there were a couple of things about A, the principle, and B, the approach. On the latter, the approach, I think everybody loves the, well, I call it the Mary Myotism, and she tells me off every time and says, no, I coined it from someone else, but, you've got to live it, not laminate it.
Yes.
And essentially the idea that you say in your book, the process is often more useful than the product. The process of coming up with your school values is really important. But then the next most important thing is not the list of the school values, it's how you use them in the next process, which is how you use them in everything. And when I think about what we did at Teacher Development Trust, worked with a brilliant group of people when we were thinking about creating our NPQ suite and thinking about what our values were and how we would suddenly take the values of a relatively small team and now make them something that hundreds of facilitators and students and so on could engage with and use. And we really worried about live, not laminate. And we thought, well, let's try and be pithy and articulate them, but then let's try and bring them to life everywhere.
Yeah.
And so the product was not, and here's the list, and we're just going to bang them in everywhere, but we would try and illustrate them everywhere. And we would illustrate them in training with people. And we would say, and this is an example of that. And what do you think would be a good example of this? And it became part of the process
Yeah.
in everything, not a laminated thing that you just had to look at occasionally.
Yeah.
And I think that was really successful. And funnily enough, when Ofsted came, it was pretty much the first thing they said was like, this is a group of people who like really live values.
Right.
And I was really proud of that. But this idea of when is the helpfulness not helpful, actually, just to say you will all do this and this is the thing and everyone will have a copy up, is not helpful.
No.
And then it also made me really reflect that when I am sometimes not helpful with my colleagues or as a leader, is when I just use airtime to think aloud,
Right.
which sometimes I find really helpful, but then it's helpful for me, but when is that helpfulness for me not helpful for anybody else?
Yeah.
And actually could probably be a bit overwhelming at times, because I just sort of, take open the dam and just ideas start tumbling out. And some people, when you're a leader, think he must really mean and put a lot of weight on all of those things. And I might even look quite excited by some ideas that have been generated in conversation or have popped out of my own head, but they're not considered. And that is not helpful. And this idea that when should I create space for other people and hold a space for them to come up with their own thinking, and then find a way to do my own brainstorming at the right time, is also part of this idea that actually when the helpfulness stops, stop, and helpful for who. And there are all sorts of processes I think we sometimes as leaders like to put in place for us to be helpful that other people find unhelpful. And actually it's obviously you hold on to, but I need to feel more help. But when the helpfulness is not helping your other colleagues, then again, you have to stop. And I spent quite a few years as a school data manager. And my goodness, data systems in schools are full of things that data managers and senior leaders find helpful and other people find deeply unhelpful.
Yes.
And we keep having to ask ourselves the question, who is this helping and how? And actually, is it time to just stop? Because actually, maybe it's not really helping the people it should help. So there were so many things about this that resonated.
Well, I think there's so much gold in that. And that's a really interesting addition, and a different way of thinking about that. And a call to action and a kind of challenge for leaders around, like you just said, who is it helping and how? And I think if leaders did think about some of the things they do that they find helpful for them and really honestly rated and how helpful it is. I was trying to think of a personal example, and one of the ones that I think only my my closest friends have been safe enough to tell me about is I find it helpful to lead up to a key take, like lead up. I do quite a long lead-in story I'm telling. I'm trying to get a point across. I find it helpful to build the tension, and they don't, because they're bored by the time they get to the punchline. It's a bit like, and some of my friends say, before we start, can we skip all of the? I know you like doing the lead-in, but I don't find it helpful. Can you skip that bit? And I think there we go.
Yeah, helpful for whom is just such an interesting question. I'm in one of these rooms where the lights have gone off, so I'm just going to dramatically stand up and.
Well, there's a key takeaway from me then. That's good. Well, let's get more into sort of the fast friend stuff. So the next one you chose was, what do you value most in a friendship? Tell us about that.
Yeah. All sorts of answers popped into my head when I saw this question. Probably one of the things I really value is just kind of the ability to just relax and have fun together.
Right.
And that ability to kind of say, I'm really looking forward to having this person here, because I'm looking forward to both helping them have a lovely evening and kind of that reflecting back, but also for them to like laugh with me. We're like creating this experience this evening together, or this lovely time, or this holiday, and just the ability I can just relax and have fun and tell stories and remember things.
Yeah.
I love that. I think that's a really wonderful thing.
Yeah.
But when I said that, I then also thought there's a yin and a yang, isn't there? Because you do want that with friends, and then you also want people who are kind of just there and helping in just the right way at the lowest moments.
Right.
And I remember two of my friends had like a particularly awful time. Actually, I was in hospital, and I'd just been diagnosed with this awful liver thing.
Yeah.
My mum had just passed away, and I was
Oh,
literally, I mean, it was horrendous. And I was literally stuck in hospital hearing that news.
yeah.
And two friends, they just drove over, and
Yeah.
they just somehow managed to persuade, even though it was like midnight, to let the hospital they just sat with me and just chatted with me, and they were
Yeah.
just there. And that's something I'm like, oh my God, that's an incredible thing. When someone is just quietly there
Yeah.
at a key moment. But it's got to be both. I think it's got to be
You're
both.
right. I think you're right. Yeah. And I would imagine that, people value that in their leaders as well. This idea that doesn't have to be any kind of demonstrably large, expressions of, say love, for instance, but just the fact that they know that their leader is there for them
Yeah.
when they need to be. And yeah, that's really interesting. I think I tend to make the mistake of trying to second guess what support other people need. Maybe I should be a bit more, what do you need from me? Because it may be that, yeah, all they needed was space. And I've inferred that they need cheering up with lots of jokey stories or something.
Yeah. Well, I think there's something about intent, and there's something about checking in.
Yeah.
I think, I mean, God, I can look back over all sorts of colleagues, and I'm sure some would say positive things and some would say less positive things about me as a leader. But
Mm.
I know I've always felt proud when someone said, oh, I went through a really tough time,
Yeah.
and I just felt you have my back, or like you helped me not worry about the work bit, and that's the thing. You just think, God, yeah, you were having a tough time, and I'm glad we could just take some of the heaviness from one part of the life maybe away slightly,
Yeah.
and just be human.
Yeah.
Just be human. I think that's such an important thing. And sometimes you can just say, and I'm still thinking about you, or we don't have to talk about it, but I'm here, right?
Yeah.
And just trying to get just the right amount, where you're asking just enough and not too much, and just doing enough, but do it in your own way. And I think it's such an important thing for people to do. And I just think we ask so much of people in education and wider philanthropy. Actually, people pour heart and soul into things in difficult situations, and their resilience is really tested. So to be just human when people need it feels like a totally invaluable thing. As leaders in the space, surely that's one thing we've got to do.
Yeah. Absolutely. Brilliant. Well, let's move on to this second ignition point, because I recognize the first bit of this, but I have no idea how it's linked to the second piece. So you wrote on the sheet, TDT, a park bench.
Yes.
How is that an ignition point? Let's talk about that.
Yeah, so this was just a remarkable moment. And I said that I launched myself into the world of Twitter and blogging and all sorts of things after I'd had my liver transplant. And I'd been trying all sorts of things, and I'd created this like data analysis system that I'd created, and I was really excited about that. And then I thought, ooh, wouldn't it be great if we could not only help people understand their data, but learn how they could be a better teacher from it? And maybe I'll create this like TripAdvisor for CPD thing. And I was reaching out and just chatting with people on Twitter, and I would message people and say, thanks for that great chat. Is there any chance you'd be up for just meeting for a coffee and a chat? And I started doing that with various people. And one of the people who I ended up having a chat with was Mark McCourt, the wonderful Mark McCourt, who said, yeah, sure, great, and he said, and it was summer, I think, and so we sort of said, well, let's, it can't have been summer, actually. When I think about the timing, it must have been colder than that, but in my head, it was a sunny day, so maybe it was summer. And we sat on a park bench. I can't even remember where the park was, in all honesty. I was just chatting away, saying, I've had this idea and this, I'm doing this, and it's really interesting, and I'm not quite sure what to do. And he just looks and said, well, what if you started a charity?
Right.
I went, tell me more.
Yeah.
Well, you obviously really care about teacher development, and you've talked about this, and what if you started a charity? And maybe I wonder if it could look like this, and I wonder if it could do this. And he just created a space for a possibility in my head.
Mhm.
Absolutely no way I'd have ever thought about it. And just created a seed of an idea and then said, inherently, and I believe you could, why don't you? What would it look like if you? I wonder what would happen if. And it was totally transformational,
God.
because that was the piece that then, out of that, obviously with lots of iteration and lots of thought,
Yeah.
came the idea of Teach Development Trust. And it came out of the idea of sitting on a park bench with Mark McCourt, who just wondered aloud and looked at me and wondered. He sort of projected the wonder onto me with a sense of, well, maybe you could do this.
Yeah.
And it's so empowering and opening and inspiring. And it's just that question sitting there and a sense of, well, maybe you could, that literally powered the, wow, I'm going to create a thing. And I frankly couldn't have even told you anything about what charities were at that time, but it became an excitement. And it was a total life transformation, because that was the thing that got me from teaching to say, well, maybe I could do this thing. But it takes a certain moment to imagine yourself into a completely new space, right?
I think that's so true, yeah. And again, this is why one of the most common things we talk about, with guests is this presence of another person.
Yeah.
Something about somebody else has done. This speaks to this idea of collaboration and community and friendship, and that idea that and not that you had low aspirations, but clearly Mark had high aspirations for you and a bigger sense of what you could possibly do. Not that you had discounted charities, because again, I wouldn't have even thought of starting. I don't know if you could start your own charity.
Well, no, and I exactly that. I wouldn't have known.
Yeah.
So he sort of, and we know we do this sometimes with students, right? You
Yeah.
sort of say, oh, well, this topic, if you carried on with this, of course, some people go on and do this. Like, I went to do this, or I know a friend who loved this and went on to do this.
Yeah.
And a little door opens, maybe a little window opens first when they see something, and then a little door opens of like, I didn't even know that door was there.
Yeah.
And it's a powerful thing to do for someone.
It is. I love that idea of windows before doors. The window is the sense it could be done, and the door is the, okay, this is how to.
Yeah. I think it's a lovely sort of curriculum analogy, actually, that a curriculum should open windows into worlds a child could otherwise not experience.
Yeah.
And it should open doors that otherwise would be closed to them. So, but it has to do both, because I think you don't want to have such a narrow existence that you only get to know what other people who lived really close to you know.
Yes.
You do want to know that, but you want to know all the other things. You want to know, well, where are the other worlds and where are the other possibilities? Or even if you've had an incredibly lucky upbringing, where are the problems? Where are the challenges? Where are the things you didn't even know were wrong? Like, we should have all of those. And then everyone should be able to have this sense of like, well, here are the steps you might take in that direction. This is what it would look like. And maybe you could. Yeah. So windows and doors, I think, is incredibly powerful for when we're thinking of any curriculum, whether for adults or for children.
Brilliant. Well, let's pause on that, because that's a great little takeaway for people as well. So let's talk about the second launchpad, and this is a bit discomforting for me, because I don't think I'm very good at this. And so when I made this, I was a bit like, oh, this is awkward. It's about execution. And so for those that are kind of watching on video, you'll see the slide, but for those who aren't, the tagline says execution is everything. And the bit underneath is kind of, projects often don't realise their potential because of the disproportionate focus on the quality of the idea compared to its implementation and execution. This effectively describes me probably only up to the last 3 years ago, maybe, where, and it wasn't a conscious decision, but I was obsessed with the idea. It sounds like if me and you put together in our whirlwind states, there would be absolute carnage. Because again, I'm a bit like you in that there's a lot going on upstairs and not much of a filter. And if I'm given the license, it all comes out. And so ideas. And sadly, I think I slipped into that thing that I again, thought more about the idea than the execution. So I started doing a bit of reading, and of course, there's lots of stuff on this. I was really taken by this work by kind of Barber, where he talks about this sort of quadrant, I suppose, with up the left-hand side, the vertical one is boldness of the form, from status quo, well, from low to high, I suppose. And on the right-hand side is the quality of the execution. And he sort of broadly says, look, if the change you're proposing is not particularly bold or innovative, and you don't execute very well, then nothing will change. If it's really bold and you continue to execute poorly, you're going to cause controversy. If you can execute really well, but it's quite small, then you'll get some improvement. And if transformation is your goal, and really interestingly, I spoke to John Hutchinson, he was suggesting that not all implementation needs to be transformational. There's nothing wrong with continual gradual improvement. But Barbara would say that if you want to really transform something, you need both. You need it to be a really audacious, I suppose, kind of bit of reform, as well as coupled with extremely good execution. And then I started thinking about my own personal situation, and sadly, I was in this chop kind of ratio where I would think really heavily about the idea, and then my motivation for the execution of it would be less. And of course, trying to flip that around, I suppose. So I started kind of messing around with this idea that obviously the impact will change. Some things have no change, some things cause controversy. And then I just started thinking about, and this was pre kind of EEF implementation cycle thinking from Marvel, but of course we now know, don't we, not really helpful kind of cycle around kind of explore, prepare, deliver, sustain. Lots of us jump very quickly to, I've got an idea, let's deliver, rather than have we got the right problem, and so on and so on. And so that was kind of where I was with my thinking. But why did it resonate with you when you saw it?
Yeah, this is a fascinating one, and you kind of saying loads of ideas, love sharing them. It's really resonant, almost in a painful way.
Yeah.
It's almost anyone who's ever worked with me, no one's ever going to say, "Oh, he was a bit short of ideas," but it just always really strong on the execution. They were never going to say that. And what I find is really fascinating is that on that matrix that you showed, essentially everything on the right-hand side is good and everything on the left-hand side is bad.
Right.
So actually we spend so much time thinking, what's the idea? What's this? What's that? What's the other? But actually, essentially, just everything is good with good execution.
Yeah.
Everything is good with good execution.
Nice.
And it's about creating not just an execution doesn't mean the leader executes and everyone else falls into line. It means the ability for everyone just to execute really well, regularly, getting stuff out of the way, simplifying, making sure the systems are there to back up, making sure that people have kind of got enough autonomy and agency to just jump in there, solve problems, make things happen. That is everything.
Yeah.
All the positive stuff happens with good execution. And one of my bits of learning about myself is that I will absolutely naturally connect ideas together, innovate some things, say, oh, what if? And I love thinking of the idea of the process, but actually I won't naturally kind of go, let's just make sure the process happens first. Yeah. And this is the power of teams. You have to notice, am I a really ideasy person who might go, oh, I wonder if maybe I can connect with that. Or am I a person who kind of wakes up and goes, right, I just want to take the next really good step here and put these people together.
Yeah.
Because brilliant teams will always have a great balance of, I'm a great project manager, I will check in, I will get that stuff done. I'm going to be the analyst who's just going to look for the detail and sort that out and do the analysis and present it. I'm going to be the connector and so on.
Yeah.
And I do think you have to both understand where you can lean into, where you bring the strength into that, and understand where some of that instinct will do damage.
Yeah.
And sometimes say, I'm a naturally ideasy person. Do I always need to do that in meetings with everybody else? Can I just put ideas down? Who can I partner myself with? If I'm not a naturally ideasy person, who's the person who is, and how can I partner with them? so that we can find a really good balance for this.
Yeah.
But how do we create just great structures and think things through? That's, I guess, thing one. The second thing is ideas are fine, but actually the first iteration of idea might be kind of fun, but it's like the 10th, 15th, 20th iteration that has any chance of being brilliant.
Yeah.
Which is when I look back at some of the stuff that I did over, I suppose, 20 years teaching TDT, now that I think about it, I think a lot of the times I came up with an idea, I loved the idea, I shared the idea, I was proud of the idea. But all of the ones that became really good were the ones where people argued with me, and then I'd have to come up with another idea, and then I'd discuss, and then we'd iterate. So I think there's also the difference between an idea versus a really well executed idea generation.
Nice.
Someone recently said to me, it was the CEO here at Purposeful Ventures, and he said, it was a lovely way of saying it in a both challenging and supportive way. He said, you kind of see really interesting things over here, and you kind of see a really interesting solution over here, and you sort of leap to it. And he said, but I just think it would be so much stronger if you just really executed the explanation of the idea all the way through, just relentlessly in stages, and then refined and iterated that. Again, something actually management consultants are very good at doing.
Yeah.
And so I think it's, yes, brilliant execution, but also the idea of going back and saying, this idea feels really good, but could it be even better?
Yeah.
Could we consult even more people?
Yeah.
Could we crispen it up even more? Are there pieces where there's 3 or 4 things? These are a bit woolly and overlapping. How do we make them totally crisp and clear? Remove all of the doubt, remove all of the potential problems.
Yeah.
And that comes back to your other point, which is actually we then co-create.
Yeah.
And in the process, you're bringing loads of other people on board to make it both brilliant and crisp and clear, and creating a culture in which everyone can say, I think that's a bit woolly.
Yeah.
I think that's a bit unclear. I think that needs to go further. Which, if you're an excited about ideas person like me, can feel very painful because it feels like people are peeing on your bonfire.
Yeah.
But actually, we need that.
I think
so. There's execution of great ideas, idea making, and execution of the process that happens. I just think we can spend more time iterating and refining and getting great processes and great ideas. And the more I see great organizations, the more I realize they do that relentlessly.
Yeah. That's really fascinating, isn't it? And one of the things that would be an interesting challenge to leaders, in my mind, there's this kind of role play where someone shows me a finished product and I say, oh, what version is that? And if they say anything lower than 3, I'm going to be like, okay, If someone says, oh, this is version 8, but hopefully potentially hints at some iterative process.
I think so. That said, I've seen version 8s which have got more and more complicated, and people have added more and more.
Yeah.
And if you are anything like me, Chris, I'm sure you will also go, oh, I can add a bit there and I can do a bit there and add some more details and add some more options. And actually, you almost want version 8 to be shorter than version 3.
Yes.
And I often like, oh, hazy, fuzzy, this kind of leads to this. That's very exciting. I love the potential of this idea. And actually, in the process, it's when someone forces you to say, yeah, but what really are the steps?
Yeah,
but is that step going to work? And that is a bit unclear. And how does it relate to this one? And it's in that painful process of clarification, simplification, really trying to distill it down, sometimes going back to the drawing board and saying, this idea is not there yet. And actually, it's not crisp and clear enough. Oh, but I thought we could move forward. Yeah, no, let's go back and try it again.
Yeah.
I honestly think some of the painful magic comes.
Yeah. I like that, painful magic. Yeah. Okay, well, we're on to our last question. For any of the eagle-eyed viewers who are watching this on the video, you may have noticed that me and David have done a sort of Superman-esque telephone box swirl, and we've changed outfits and we've changed location. And maybe that'll be revealed some point in the future. But anyway, let's move on to the last Fast Friends question. And David, you chose this one, which is interesting. Is when did you last cry in front of another person? So tell us a bit about that.
Yeah, so I will be honest, I cry all the time. So like at the drop of a hat, could be in front of the TV. So I thought, well, it can't just be in front of the TV.
Yeah.
But no, this is a meaningful thing for me and a meaningful life moment. And and it was when my husband and I found out that we're going to have a baby.
Oh,
And
yes.
and I, fully admit it was at a scan, and we basically saw little heartbeat, and I just lost it completely.
Yeah.
Absolutely tears streaming down my face. But it's one of those things you just kind of go, wow, life is just about to change in the most lovely way. So a genuinely amazing moment, really lovely.
That is so cool, isn't it? I remember. I mean, there's kind of weeping in there, and then there's like sobbing. And I was thinking about if I think about that, I remember child-related sobbing. The first night when we brought our daughter, so our first child, home, I don't know why it affected me so much at that point, but I remember thinking, "Oh, right, is it? There's no one else to help us then. We have to look after a human being tonight. Like, oh my God." And for whatever reason, I remember vividly kind of like sobbing so much that I couldn't catch my breath. And that hasn't happened very often. But that's amazing news. Oh, how lovely.
Thank you.
Well,
I'm looking forward to it. That's going to be a big life change starting 2026.
Of course it is, yeah. Well, and I mean, sometimes I find it interesting to think about your life in kind of chapters, where, because for you to be able to do what you did kind of with TDT, and that must have been all consuming, a very kind of work related chapter of your life. And I guess you're shifting into another one now, which will be super exciting. Well,
it will.
What an amazing way to finish the podcast. And again, thanks so much for coming on. I'm sure people are going to love this, especially those that have known you from afar for a long time, and now they've got to know you a little bit better. So how can people connect with you and the stuff you're working on projects-wise?
Well, I am working at Purposeful Ventures, when they can go to purposefulventures.org to find out more about all of our work we're doing there. I have a personal website where I try and sort of post interesting personal projects, which is informededucation, all one word, .com. And otherwise, find me on LinkedIn.
Amazing. Well, that's great. Well, like you say, get in touch with David, and if you like any other Leadership Launchpad stuff, then there's a website now, and hit me up on the socials as well. That's great. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you.
Thanks so much.